So for our next and final talk today, we're going to jump into the challenging arena of model-based engineering. Today's topic is knitting together the data architecture that works across communities and use cases. What does that actually mean? When we talk about model-based engineering, we're talking about everything from product support to DevSecOps, condition maintenance, agile acquisition, product lifecycle management, yada, yada, yada. A lot of words get tossed around. And people are doing amazing work in these categories. But when we come down to the data, how are we knitting that together so that we produce data once, authoritatively, and that everyone who needs it can access it? So I'm not the person to tell you how that answer, but I brought some really smart people along to talk about this topic. So I'd like to take a minute and say hello to our guests. I am not going to try and introduce all of you and your smartness. I'm going to let you tell everyone about yourselves and why you're interested in this topic, why it affects you. So I'm going to start with my friend Jason Hunter that I see here. And can you give us a little insight on who you are and why this topic matters to you?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks to everyone who stuck around for late in the day for this panel. An important one, as Nicole said. My name is Jason Hunter. I'm actually come from the Intel community. I've been an Intel officer for about the past 20 years, with that continuing for the last couple of years in the other reserves. Data movement has been the biggest part of that job for for that entire time. But here about 5 years ago, I transitioned over into also working with NAVSEA and weapon systems with that, where that movement of data from sensors and to weapon systems and for situational awareness, it's all the same problem set as we look at this of how do we actually maneuver the availability, discoverability, and then create the utility of information within the environments that we're working on.
Excellent, thank you. I know I have my friend Carl Caton there from Informatica, one of our industry SMEs on data architecture. I'll let you talk a little bit more about yourself and what you guys do.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Carl Caton. I'm a principal architect with Informatica, a hybrid cloud enterprise data management company that has been in business for about 30 years. I've been with them for about 24 of them. My background's actually in application development and architecture, and with Informatica, I came in as a sales consultant. I've had a bunch of roles over the 24 years I've been here. And what I've noticed is that how we've transitioned from analytics from being mainframe oriented to client server to now cloud, and noticing the transitions from one to the other. We're in a very exciting period now where the management of data has really exploded to include a lot more than just management or senior officials, to anyone that basically has management over a certain decision space within their area. So providing them with data that is safe and protected, fit for purpose, and timely is of critical importance. And it's what we focus on, what I focused on with data integration and data quality work over the past years.
Excellent, and I believe, if I'm correct, this is Michael Palmatto from NavAir that's joining us here as well.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm a HQE NavAir headquarters data officer. I'm attached to the digital team of the cyber and engineering division. I got an extensive career out there in industry, primarily in data science, application development, data architecture, and many Fortune 50 companies, including CVS, Anheuser-Busch, and Samsung. I'm tasked to really help implement the naval data strategy at the NavAir level. So a lot of my activities really cross into a number of these different areas. And again, quite a fan of previous use of Informatica in my industry use.
Excellent. All right, so I've got a few questions, and then we'll see what comes up from folks in the audience, and it comes up in the discussion. What I wanted to start with is we just ended a session on data science and data science skills, and are we ready as an organization, as a Navy, to do things with data. And some of the key things they started with was, figuring out what we do and what kind of data we need, and then being able to sort of form, that segment from there. And I know that in explicit lanes, DevSecOps or in digital engineering, we have some really clearly, clearly defined processes. We know what we do there. We know how to do it. Where are we losing the segmentation? And now that we're going to this enterprise level view, and how does a data architecture begin to form out of those explicit processes so that those data science people, the people who have to do the work with it, can do their job? And I don't even know where you start with that. Does it start with like the data itself, or does it start with something else? I don't know. Anyone can jump in.
Oh, well, as a data guy, I second that it's a data. You start with the data, right? So when you look at data science in general, and sort of the things that I've been involved in and what I've heard people talk about is really what you're trying to do is flip the 80-20 rule, basically from 80% getting the data in a form that you can trust and that you think is ready to be worked with, either as a training set or even understanding the outputs, to 20% data prep and 80% actually doing the analysis. And that's a big step to take. And part of that is really trying to make sense out of the world that we came out of in terms of how data was managed for analytics prior to that, really in the to a large extent in the data warehouse world, to where where the data warehouse actually, if it had 1%, between 1 and 10% of the data in an enterprise, that was a lot, right? So now you have we're transitioning to data as a strategic asset. And so it needs to be managed that way, and it needs to be, and that's easy to say, but to get there, it's really a start of understanding what fit for purpose, right? So what does the data scientist need, and how do you get from the data that's available to understanding it, cataloging it, ingesting it, relating it, and then getting to some baseline where you can say, when you deliver it, when the data scientist takes it on, that okay, that's something that person understands and is ready to act upon, and then can actually do the analysis. So the parts that are in there are basically it's a group activity, right? So it's not something that one person or one product can do, but it's a confluence of, I think, what was called data governance, which has a kind of a bad connotation of the policeman, you shall do this, to connecting constituencies together and the data that they have under management, so that you can get to that point of being able to get that baseline as fast as possible.
So you mentioned the term data, what does the data scientist want? But does the systems engineer or the software coder doing DevSecOps or the cybersecurity person, do they consider themselves a data scientist? Do they care enough to learn how to do this, to be part of this?
Well, I think they need to be connected, right? So I don't think that they have to become data scientists, but I think in the goal of trying to understand a particular initiative, what data is required for that, then there's going to be some research that has to happen in terms of, who did what and what does this mean and where did this data come from. All of that has to, it's beyond, these things that are all, you can't really see, it's a stick-up note, right? That who do I call to get onboarded? Who do I call to find out what this particular data element means? There has to be some sort of automation and relatable infrastructure to be able to say, find out who to call, right? Who to contact and who's responsible. How do you get trust in the data that you have, and who are the constituents that are involved in that? Yeah, coders are part of that. DevSecOps, everybody on the coding end of it, on the that touches the data, as well as the constituents who are responsible for the initiatives that caused that data to be collected in the first place. So how do you connect the dots between who's had a hand in either policies, procedures, in developing that data, as well as what that data contains that you can derive yourself by just introspecting with it, being able to see what the profile of it is, or who used it, where it came from, really things that you would think of in asset management that now has to be transitioned to data management. And certainly some of the things that we're focused on very deeply to try to make that data scientist's job easier in terms of figuring out how to assemble the data that they need in order to be successful.
So what I heard you say, and I think is true, is that there's multiple roles here that have to be pulled together. In terms of on the Navy side, with what you're doing in IWS and what you're doing over at NavAir, how do you, when you think of an architecture, right? Sometimes I think of like when you build a building, right? Whose job is what? Who's the guy who's got the electrical? Who's the guy who got the plumbing? Who's the guy who's
and what ties that all together?
Right. And so how are you from a really programmatic level and then from a SysCom level, how are you approaching that in terms of getting a defined data architecture?
Yeah, Nicole, I'll take that one and talk from a NAVC level, or at least PEO IWS level. Everything Carl said was correct. Once we have the data available, how we, what we can do with it and how we approach it. We're doing a much better job within the Navy, I think, at the business operations side of the house. With things that they're looking to do to link together with Jupiter and some of the data warehouses that are bringing together that business operations data into one location where it's queryable, where we'll be able to do some dashboards. There's a lot of work that's happening in different data warehouses with Tableau or Clicker, different tools that are given visualizations and being put together at that level. Where I think we're struggling a little bit more is actually on the the mission side of the data. And it's not to say that we're not doing great things in silos of excellence, but there is a significant infrastructure part that comes in place for our ability to move some of our mission-related data into locations where we can make it available to a broader set of data scientists or analysts, or in this case, a lot of times a collection of operators with data scientists, so that they can actually determine how and what they want to, what questions they want to answer out of that data. And that's a piece that we're trying to move forward with. One thing that we've had, starting to see that transition, that availability of the, commercial classified cloud and increases in access points to that environment. So a lot of the difficulties that we had of, accreditation of on-prem siloed environments, where we may have the data, we're...
Oh, no. Oh, I think we lost him for a second, but we may have him back. Jason, are you there?
You're on mute, Jason. You're listed on mute.
No, I'm sorry. Can you hear me again?
Oh, there you go. All right. Yes.
No, I apologize. It looks like it must have froze. Lost me in the discussion. I promised that I had solved all the world's problems wherever right after wherever it cut off.
So I'll give you, Mike, I'll give you a chance to go ahead and answer as well from what you guys are doing over at NavAir.
So I think that Jason, again, was really spot on. From a data perspective, a lot of the same type of challenges. So visibility, just kind of understanding where our data is, what's the authoritative source, the business transformations, what kind of, again, the word governance on top of those processes. Those are major items which historically we've been trying to work through. Ownership of that data. So the Navy owns the data, and trying to eliminate some of those data silos and individuals trying to keep data away from consolidation in an enterprise type solution. and trying to eliminate some of the redundancy. That reduces the potential mistakes, risks, the cost factors that come into play with this. And a lot of what Jason has kind of talked about, that's a direction which Naver is pushing into as well. Is there opportunity for us to leverage investments such as Avana and Jupyter? How much would be things that we can host in those platforms versus continuing with on-prem or cloud platforms that we existing have? Trying to migrate, where possible, our stuff over to cloud platforms. So a lot of those same type of challenges Naver is facing. But again, I think trying to crack that problem of visibility, just understanding where all those data sources are, who is the person responsible, the SME behind it, those are major challenges currently which we're trying to deal with.
Are there a data architecture, like you said, there's many things. We're not just talking about put data in one place and we're done, right? That's not a data architecture. And are there key responsibilities or key roles that need to be in place to not only set it up and develop it, but to manage it and maintain it, right? Because once it's in place, it's not going to be a self-sustaining system. There's going to be changes and new tools and new things that have to be introduced over time. First, let me ask that first question. Would you say that there's key roles that need to be in place at either the Navy or at the SysCom levels to make this happen? No one wants to answer that one.
Oh, yeah, I didn't. I thought you were asking, Michael. Yeah, I think that it's a great question, right? So it's we've gone about it in different ways at different times, right? For going back to data warehousing, that a warehouse wasn't, it was engineered to answer a limited set of questions accurately. What we're facing now is we don't know the questions to ask, right? So we're basically trying to understand, a situation or try to look for patterns that are unusual, and at the same time we want to be able to get some sort of trust level in the data that we're working with. So there are two things at work, right? One is trying to understand or in some way certify data. That's where the efforts that are ongoing now into giving the owners of the data. And by owners, yeah, the Navy owns the data, but then there are different departments that basically are responsible for creating data that should be managing it, right? That this is the latest with when you talk about the data mesh concept that seems to be coming out in terms of discussing, the digitization of processes. That aspect of it needs to be managed in some comprehensive way in terms of the policies and procedures that govern that. So it's not sort of an imposition, but basically a rule book that says, we all have to play in the sandbox, and you aren't just going to use your data. You're going to depend on data that's generated by others as well. So here's how we coordinate. Now, how we get there is going to have to be incrementally, and technology has a lot to help there, but that is increasingly being described as a social problem as well as a technical problem that has to be managed as a coherent whole. From a data perspective, the tools and the processes that distributed systems have given us allows us to ingest vast amounts of data and be able to make sense out of them from a basic pattern standpoint, and then taking that and saying, okay, I want to build a process that reliably, processes data, but I want to get away from actually hard coding these processes or coding them at all, right? So you want a low code, no code environment. How do I move more towards a pattern-based transformational approach where I don't, I sort of think I know what I'm getting, but there might be it might be a CSV coming in that's giving me sort of, coordinate information, but there might be formatting information in that cell that, would corrupt that. How can I get at those things faster? So there's a couple so it's management of data as well as, overall process in terms of, turning data essentially into a product, figuring out what can be commoditized and thinking about it more from a product development mindset that you're not the only one that's going to be using this.
So I want to follow on that, and then I have a question here from the audience. I feel like at the Navy they need titles, right? They need position descriptions and very specific, like this is your job, right? Like you're going to start doing this. Is that how we have to approach this, or is this really everybody's job now, and everybody's position description gets updated with certain requirements and roles? What's the right approach here to have the right people in place to keep this architecture happening, or I guess standing?
I think there's probably a little bit of both of those things. I mean, Carl kind of hit on a key point there. He didn't call it a cultural change. I forget which word he used, but it was kind of indicative of the same thing of, we have a ton of data, and we have a ton of different databases, and a lot of different ways that we collect data within the Navy. But what we also have is a lot of people who have learned how to get by or through Navy and Department of the Defense processes, and a lot of times that is manipulation of how you enter data, where you enter data, when you put it in place. So there are some things that have to shift, from that side of just people understanding that, your data, it's important of keeping it accurate, putting it in a system, because it may have utility to other folks other than, you or your individual program or project with it. But in order to kind of do that, one thing that we've sort of seen successful, or maybe I'll flip that the other way, and just policy or whatnot does not seem to be overly successful. Telling everybody they have to keep their data accurate, people, the majority will roll their eyes and just say, well, obviously. Well, at the same point in time, they may be having some practices where that's not necessarily the case. But having someone in a role of kind of data champion or, solutions architecture, which is really what a lot of this is in the first, especially in the beginning stages, where they can kind of help put, what questions are you trying to answer, or what problem are you trying to hit, and they can help, bring that data together so that you can get to a solution or create a visualization or a dashboard and show utility. I think that's probably, from my perspective, the next step that we sort of need to see at the different echelons of the Navy. That advocate and that, solutions architect that can help sort of take this forward and, start to teach people of why it's important to keep data accurate and how it can be used and inform things.
And I'd kind of just to springboard off that, I'd kind of agree with what Jason said about it being a hybrid of those two approaches. So I do think there should be some certain roles that are specifically identified to help, as he's labeled the champions. I would agree with that kind of an approach with it. But then also there'll be individual accountability back to the workforce that we're trying to train in as well. So this is, again, very similar to some of the organizations I've seen out in the corporate world, where people may not know where to go, may not know how to solve a problem, so they'll just build an Access database or an Excel spreadsheet instead of using a corporate asset that's already out there. So trying to help educate people, building that up through some of our communities of practice, which we've had. Some of our specific engineering, like the SET group, has worked on some things in this space, but just trying to kind of educate people in addition to trying to hone what roles are responsible and individual people are responsible for which area, and then to try to eliminate redundancy and just increase communication between these groups. Those are all big focus areas for us.
Awesome. Okay, well, kind of dovetails into this question. I think J. Dot asked, what, in your opinion, is the balance between experts in a specific field and a data scientist? What does a perfect harmony and efficiency actually look like?
Okay, I'm happy to jump in on that one. So one of the other parts of my job, I also work in training data scientists. I'm an adjunct at Davenport University in the data science program there and the master's program there. So I understand data scientist is being thrown out there in a generic term, but we don't necessarily need a whole bunch of data scientists. You need data analysts, you need engineers, you need AI ML specialists. So you'll see that when you say, is it a data scientist versus other, I would say there's a whole lot of other roles that help support that process. And things like a good analyst, a good engineer are just as valuable, just as important as the data scientist. So I'd like to throw that in there too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's a collaborative environment, and that's really at the heart of it is to open that up so that it's so you can connect people as well as the data, right? So that's basically what you want to shoot for. And like I said earlier, the data scientist has a particular approach to, an iterative approach to try to get to a solution state that's going to take a lot of different approaches, a lot of different tools, a lot of different ways to slice and dice the data. Basically, understanding the data under management, in that process is going to be vitally important. And I think it's not necessary to put it all on the data scientist to have to do that. It really, and how that is managed. We're not all in one place today, so the electronic connectivity between these different constituents is very important, and building that out and making that more robust is definitely a pathway to success. But it really is a multidisciplinary approach.
One of the things we talked about, so track 3 is about model-based systems engineering, and the PEO IWS is the sponsor for that. And Emerald Kano is pushing it, this model-based structure very heavily with her program managers. And one of the things that you learn really fast, and you're going to go buy an asset or you're going to try and do something model-based, is that everybody who has to touch that data in the form that a system engineer or a designer might put it, isn't a modeler, and they may not, it might be someone in your contracting shop or your acquisitions side of the house. It might be somebody from the fleet side that has a requirements thing that they need to check in on, that is you're putting out the request to make sure that it's framed correctly. Data has to talk to the right people in the right time, in the right place, right? And so it becomes a responsibility question of, we want to do this, we want to use model-based because it's a good format for being able to serve a lot of people in an organization that's multidisciplinary. But how are we going to put that together so the right data is in the right place in a way that somebody who's coming in from, I was trained how to do acquisition, or I was trained how to write a contract, I'm a lawyer, can actually interact with it? What does that approach look like in this architecture? And if you don't have an answer, that's fair. This might just be a tough question.
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, that gets back down to how does business and IT get closer together, right? So how do you make the data more of a product, right? And the model-based approach kind of touches on that, and that's not going to happen overnight, right? So the way that it seems to be happening, if I look at what my customers are doing, is that they're really at first trying to understand what they even have under management, right? So you can take an enterprise that has, between tens to hundreds of thousands of schemas across the enterprise. How are you going to ingest and catalog all of that and figure out how it all interrelates? Not in one day, right? So it's going to be an iterative approach. It's going to be largely project driven, right? So that you're going to that's kind of the way these things happen. And what's key here, though, is not just ingesting it and modeling it and understanding it from a technical perspective, of being able to tag it and relate it in ways that a lawyer or a non, I guess when you mention lawyer, you mean non-technical, right? So, I mean, we're all becoming more technical in a sense. We carry these little devices around with us so we can fly around and get the information that we need. So there is going to be this convergence where technical and non-technical is going to get a little blurred, because what really, I go into, I go and look for something that I need to use to work on my house. I walk into Home Depot. I don't necessarily know what I'm looking for, but after a while, I can figure it out, right? So we have to kind of provide a method that approximates that kind of shopping experience, right? Where you go in and that somebody else is doing a similar project or has done something similar. Can I search on what they're doing? Can I find tags that relate to what I might be interested in, and start to build that? That process in itself is going to cause or provide the opportunity for an organization of data assets that are more amenable to being provisioned to particular constituents. But you don't get there overnight. You start by, first of all, understanding what it is that you have and how it's being used and how it's proliferating across your organization. And then you build from there.
I'd say within our organization, been a lot of interest, a lot of activities in certain areas such as high performance computing, digital twins, and model-based systems engineering. I know within model-based systems engineering, the SET team, for example, system engineering team, has had some things going for several years now at this point. And when they brought those groups together, it was a collaboration between business customers, business SMEs, as well as engineers, contractors, a whole large group of different diverse type people coming together. So as they started to build out some of those initial modelings and doing some of those initial simulations, it really incorporated some of that SME knowledge that you're talking about. Now, also, it's kind of been a very conscious recruiting effort too, as well. So within our groups, we understand that, like, if you're going for a data scientists are hard to recruit. Once you train them up, they tend to jump around to different groups, and then they'll tend to go back out to the corporate world. But one thing that's been successful for NavAir is looking for more new college grads, hiring in a new college grad, and then training them up on the pieces that they don't know. Now, whether we're talking about HPC, we're talking about digital twins, MBSE, that's been kind of a go-to. Now, another thing we try to do is try to leverage those type of government type resources so we don't become way over dependent on contractors and vendors to step into as well. There's a clear advantage to leveraging that triangle of academia, the corporate world, as well as government. And by balancing that out and training up our government people a little bit more in these areas, it gives you more of that long-term commitment, which brings some of that consistency to the organization. So we've seen, again, in some of those program areas, especially in some of the more warfighting programming areas within the aircraft division, I can point to several examples where there's been conscious hiring and success in those teams in bringing in those type of resources in order to meet that requirement.
Yeah, how you handle that is basically, I mean, I think of it, something I heard from a healthcare, the VP at Health First. Basically, if he wants something funded, he uses the term AI. He's trying to hire people, he uses ML. And when he's telling people what to do, it's statistics, right? So it's basically, it boils down, you have to have this group that, understands that, that the data science world is it's not precise. You don't know, there isn't a direct path to a solution. So, making sure that you have the materials to do your iteration on is going to be very important. And if you have a data management infrastructure that supports that, I'm not, and you can see this kind of in other ways too. So this is not an Informatica ad here. Basically look at how processing has broken up, right? When you get a container world based on Docker, right? And then it's like you have all these containers and you go like, oh crap, what do I do now? I have to orchestrate this stuff. So Kubernetes kind of, comes on the scene, and Docker, believe it or not, actually wasn't compatible with Kubernetes. They didn't think it was a problem. They got religion. But you're now looking at, okay, how do I disintermediate the application developer from the OS admins and make this more agile overall. This is the same kind of process that we're going through in data management, in being able to sort of integrate the producers of the data, be able to provide a context that isn't there when you pull that data out of that environment where it was created, and then make that sort of evident to other constituents. And it's, Informatica is involved in that. It's a big problem. But I think that's, those kinds of toolings are being thought about and worked on very judiciously. And I think that it will, we're getting to find out what cloud computing is really going to offer us in terms of that kind of agility.
I'd argue that between what we both just said, that it's a government it becomes a government responsibility, right? Like it becomes an inherent responsibility that if you are sitting in the government, you've taken the oath, and you are leading anything, that you are now responsible for that, your piece of that data architecture, your piece of that role, right? And whether it's a governance role, whether it's a data creator role, whatever, it's not a right now it's considered like a additional duty, right? like oh, okay, I'll take on this collateral duty you've given me of doing one more thing.
But if you feel like you're getting something out of it, you're more likely to participate. That's really the key, right? You have to fill out the paperwork. Oh, geez, because somebody upstream needs it, but it doesn't do me any good. It's taking away from my Miller time. So So in this case, though, this is where governance kind of can nudge people in the right direction, where that culture aspect has to really, that's where it doesn't have to be a hammer on people, right? There's something to be gotten out of this. So it is something that we need to look a little closer at.
So if we want to move fast, we're coming to the end here, and I do want to get to the velocity question. So the Navy's trying to move fast. They're trying to do a lot of things quickly, and they're trying to catch up to where they think industry is and where they need to be able to modernize the fleet. I'm going to pick on IWS because I know this one better. And, they have the Forge. We had an ad yesterday up about that, and I know that they're using model base as part of their structure of how they're going to get into their DevOps environment and put out new software. Awesome, right? How do we start to do it fast when I can tell you that we might have 200 people that work on this team or on this staff, and maybe 20 of them, and we don't want it all to be contractors, right? Maybe 20 of them kind of understand enough to talk about it, lead it, and the other 180 have no clue. What can we do to help everyone take on their role in that architecture to be able to move fast as a team and not be solely reliant on external resources?
So, Nicole, I'll tackle this one first, and I actually want to hit this from two different directions because the move fast, I think, is sometimes, especially because it's associated with the data architecture, panel that we're talking here, is occasionally dangerous. So it is that concept of move fast that a lot of times gets us to build smaller silos because the Navy is really big. And when we talk about bureaucracies and how it's really difficult to know what other people are doing, this is probably one of the worst organizations on the planet. I mean, we are culturally, grown up from that thought process of I need to be able to operate a ship alone and not afraid. Well, we've carried that over into every portion of the organization with that. And when we push people to go fast and we talk about data architecture, they go fast up to the echelon that they can kind of control and move through. I mean, it's really hard to do things at like a Syscom level or Department of the Navy level. So people generally don't go that high. What they end up doing is they partially solve a problem, and then anytime we solve that problem below a Syscom level, we solve it across each of the Syscoms in parallel, and then all of a sudden we've exacerbated our problem, 5 or 6 times because people have been told to move fast. Now, flipping that a little bit, out of the data architecture and going back to what you talked about with the software development and different things and initiating modeling, what we've kind of been trying to push for folks coming into the Forge and whatnot is, an acknowledgement up front that you are not going to get it perfect, so don't try. Actually embrace the concept of Agile. Take the people that you have who do understand, or to what degree they understand, let them start, and then you right size as you go. But we've made sure that everybody kind of understands that the goal is to use that model as an authoritative source. The goal is to to use the JIRA backlog to drive and guide all of the development efforts, so that everybody understands. And we will iterate and improve and get more efficient as we go forward, but identified up front that, hey, this is the end state vision of where we're going to go, and that allows us to kind of take that core of folks that do start understand it, that really want to talk about it, really dig in, and then we can expand out from there.
So you're going to mature into a data architecture?
We'll mature along the path of, data architecture at a larger level Navy level is a little bit different than trying to do it for a discrete, subject area like what the Forge is to, for a combat, a surface combat ship system. It's a little bit easier to frame that piece, get that core architecture than it is to do something at, Department of the Navy level. So yeah, in answer to your question there, yeah, we have an opportunity to kind of mature into that because there's already an existing architecture for how it works today, so we can take that as a starting point and then kind of, build that forward into the model and integrate in. But I think that is a different question than when we raise that up and trying to look at the, Department of the Navy level or, cross-SysCom, different things at a higher level.
So that's fair, right?
Yeah.
You have a specific project. I think, Michael, you might have been about to say this, but I think at the SysCom level and then at the greater echelon one level, who's your architect? Who's taking all of that individual piece and putting that together? And that was to you, Michael, as far as like at the Navier level, yeah.
So again, I would kind of go off of what Jason said. Partially, I'm mature into it, but also trying to leverage capabilities that we've built. Now, we actually have an enterprise architecture team that's been built around that to help drive some of those decisions. But as Jason has said, as you get down to the SysCom levels, some of that can be a little bit more of a challenge. Now, one clear signal we've heard from our Admiral, as well as Mr. Sasala, the Dawn Chief Data Officer, is really about cost reduction and avoiding things that don't add any value. So that's been one way that we've been able to kind of push forward. So if we're not seeing something that's adding capability to a warfighter, if we're seeing something that we're just doing because that's the way it's always been done, those are the things that are coming underneath the most amount of scrutiny. But then as we start to look at capabilities, we've got a DevSecOps environment that we've stood up within NavAir 2 as well. Those same containers could be reused in other areas. We could use those at a DON level. We could use those at a SysCom level. So trying to leverage investments like that we've made, try to leverage that across NavAir entities, that's been a real big push for us too, probably for the last 18 months or so. So I would say that kind of maturing into it, but also focusing on things that produce value.
Right, I totally agree with that. And I think we're basically looking at, we talk about future-proofing at Informatica, right? Because that's what we mean by that is exactly what Michael just went through. Is just you come up with these containers with an abstraction of functionality that you can leverage by changing the orchestration or by parameterization, or basically you can direct it more efficiently, and that's where everything is going. So not necessarily all there yet, but I think top line organizations are making a very good effort to get to that point.
So we're wrapping closely. We're kind of coming close to wrap here, but what I do want to say, I mean, it's very clear that we have a lot of really good work happening, and the SysComs are working very hard to get to this greater enterprise views. I think that a lot of times we hear, oh, we're not moving fast enough. We're not, and this goes back to the move fast velocity thing. And when I started doing this work with Jason years ago, when we were working more directly together, this whole conversation could not have happened, quite frankly. and then you think, it's almost 4 years later, and this is the discussions we're having, and we're having discussions about AI and ML and being ready for that. And trying to get Jupyter Advanced being in place and going to cloud-based structure, and people starting to understand zero trust, all of those different things that were words on the Google that no one understood, and now are realities that we're trying to actually build to and have a workforce understand. So I do think we're moving quite fast, and when it comes to the data architecture at the DON level, have we made the right first steps? And are we on the right trajectory? And Carl, I'll ask you from, you guys have some Navy work that you're doing over there. And are you guys seeing, that looks like what we were doing with industry, that's going the right way? Or are you seeing things that you're flagging as red flags?
I think it's going in the right direction. I don't know what I would throw as a flag would be to do nothing, I guess, and that's not happening. I mean, this is happening because it has to. That's so it's you kind of look at organizations or methodologies, or this is the way we've always done it. That works as long as there's no imperative. Once all of a sudden there's like an imperative to move to a higher degree of operational readiness, then all of a sudden, things happen. So, and that's what's happening. I think there's an urgency with our Navy customers, military in general, is that they know what to do. That it's really, how do we do this more efficiently, more agilely, and be able to leverage the technology so that so it doesn't cost as much, right? So the cost is definitely a factor there, and the tools are there, right? So they're new tools. It takes a while to kind of integrate them into the culture, and that's happening. So I really applaud the work that's going on. I'm not just saying that. The people that are on the ground actually doing the work, I'm very impressed with. I just really think that it's a big problem, and the idea of going faster. Agile means you increment, right? Going faster means you wind up in the wrong place faster. That's the risk. So, the tools are there to help obtain incremental benefits that I think will accrue, right? To getting you where you need to go. And it really is just a matter of figuring out how to make appropriate use of them from a design perspective, right? It's from a data perspective. Get the data in the right form before you operate business logic against it, right? Because that way it's a best practice. So if you get a new feed, you can roll with it. Now the technology is more pattern based, where you can throw anything down there. Yeah, the fallout can be directed appropriately, and so there's a little bit more wiggle room. While at the same time, I keep on going back to the warehouse, but that was a heavily engineered project where we've gotten a sense of what quality is. It has to be right the first time. And we've got to lose that, because we don't know where we're going necessarily. We're going to increment our way there. And the data volumes and the constituents who are involved in this, the partners, who's a partner today, not tomorrow. And all this is a very, very chaotic, data-centric world that we're moving into, and there's a measured approach that we can take to manage it effectively.
All right, so I've got about a minute left, and what I want to give you guys a chance to do is, we talked to non-traditionals in this forum, right? The whole point of this is to open the aperture, and so if you were talking to someone who's an entrepreneur or someone who's trying to say, hey, how can I help? What would be the one thing you'd ask of them in terms of this data architecture, data challenge that we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll take this one first, actually, if you don't mind, because I've thought about this a lot as I've watched industry days happen within IWS, and I've watched some of the systems engineers within the warfare system interact with industry, and having myself been out also within industry and working within the IT side of the house. The thing that I would ask is that when you come in to talk to the customer on the government side, try and listen first to what their product is or problem is, and then try and translate that into the verbiage that that makes sense to you with an IT understanding or a data understanding, as that is. But then try and communicate it back in the language that was used by the government when they opened it up. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a meeting and just watched government and industry talk past each other. They're both talking, very close to the same thing, but they're using different language in the way that they're describing it, and they're just not seeing how close they actually are to a solution. And I think this is a little bit easier for industry potentially to maybe take that step back and say, okay, this is my customer or potential customer. Let me look at this communication in a slightly different way.
Okay, fair question. All right.
I would say bravo. I would go right along with those same type of comments. Again, when we engage with vendors, quite often I see it's what I would call a fishing expedition. Come understanding our use case, or if you don't understand our use case, listen, ask questions. Try to come upon that before you start pitching, hey, this new platform, this new vendor solution in order to solve your problem. For those vendors that have engaged with us, that have come to us and saying, here's a problem that we have out in industry. We know that you also have this at NavAir. Here's how you could potentially solve it. Here's how we can work through those. Those type of presentations seem to land very well with us, as opposed to these more like, give us 6 months, give us an amount of money, and we'll go out there and we'll try to figure out what your problem is. So again, I would kind of just say, bravo, Jason. I'd go right along with that too as well.
Yeah, totally. And for me, when I work with, with my customers, it's, I guess the one thing that sticks out is, there's a tendency to leverage the vendor as in a stump the chump kind of contest, where, you're looking at, the person's looking at a problem from their particular perspective and coming out and saying, can you do this? Can you do X? And there's about 100 different ways to do X. And I don't know which one to recommend to you, or whether I would recommend what we do even, at all. So there is often a reluctance to really share a picture of, what you're trying to do. And of course, if it's classified, there's certain constraints around that. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about basically, it's, I think, a good idea to ask the vendor how they would do something. And we are definitely in a position to listen to you, in terms of what are you trying to do? Tell me what this future state looks like in your mind, right? What does this look like? What are you trying to do? And then, give the vendor a chance to say how they would solve that problem. Right, that's a piece that doesn't always work very well, or has to be encouraged. And I understand that there's a level of trust that has to be obtained, to figure out, that I actually know what I'm talking about, and I might actually have a good recommendation. It takes a while sometimes to get to that point, but there's a lot of new stuff out there, and we're taking, vendors like Informatica are certainly at the forefront of it. We've had to transition through a lot of the same things that the Navy's going through. Certainly not at the same scale, but basically Informatica's origins are in mainframe computing, and then client server, and now we're cloud native. How did we get there? And there's some stories to tell there too. So I think an open dialogue is really important.
Well, I think I'll take those notes. We're going to give all this feedback back to CNR, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. This is a fantastic group. Parker, thank you for managing my Slido for me behind the scenes. It's been a very engaging conversation, and we clearly have tons more we could be talking about. So we encourage you all watching to stay engaged on LinkedIn and Twitter and Slack. And keep up the conversation. Come to Naval X, talk to people. We're looking for help, and we want to have that communication. If you're competing, keep at it. If you're engaging, we'll see you tomorrow. This is it for Hack the Machine Unmanned today.